Hello and welcome. Today I am going to be following up, just touching on some of the stuff from previous videos, clarifying some things. I want to start off by saying, in all these videos, I am not a mathematician, I am not a cryptographer. I know the basic concepts of a lot of this stuff, but I don't necessarily know the math behind it. I'm going to try to simplify some things and just go over some things. I do want to point out that some of my viewers mentioned in the comments of previous videos that I was pronouncing and writing something wrong, incorrectly. I kept saying stenography, and I kept saying the art of hiding messages. No, stenography is the art of note-taking. Just like a stenographer is that person in court that types down what everybody says using a special little typewriter. What I meant to say and meant to write, and I adjusted in some of the videos in the description of the video, is I meant to say steganography. So stenography and steganography are two different things. Steganography, if I'm saying it right, is the art of hiding a message, not necessarily encrypting. It's kind of, like I said, it's the art of hiding a message. Like, not only do you have a safe, but you hide it in a wall so people don't see it. So not only do you have to break into the safe, they have to know you have a safe and know where it is. Basic concepts. Now, some people mentioned in the video, someone wrote, oh, encryption is just shuffling letters around and it's not that secure, something along those lines. I mean, that's true for some encryption. For example, going back to some of the earliest encryptions would be the Caesar cipher, right? Which, as you look here, we have a list of letters, and basically you would just shift the letters over. So in this case, they gave a little example here on the Wikipedia page. A is X, B is Y, C is Z, and so forth and so on. And so if you know how far to shift it over, you can decode it. You can also shuffle the letters up so they're not all just shifted, but they're shuffled around. And that's fine. It's not the best way. I used to, a long time ago, do in the newspaper. It's been a while since I've seen a physical newspaper, but they used to have in all the newspapers a hidden message or message stimulus, and you can decode it. And I would do it all the time. And there's certain little tricks that you can do to figure out how to translate it over. There's a great book that I bought years ago. I'm actually letting someone borrow it now. I think it was written around 1999. I bought it my senior year of high school, called The Code Book by Simon something. I should have brought it up here on the screen. Check it out. It goes from early, Caesar cipher codes all the way through time to modern times. It's in 1999. I don't know if there's an updated version of it. But reading that really helps you wrap your mind around. It basically goes through, someone came up with this type of encryption, and then, someone figured out how to decode it, and that led to someone's death or a battle being won or something along those lines. And it goes through, World War II, all the way up again to modern day encryption with computers, which is a lot more complex than this. So yeah, this is a type of encryption where you're shuffling letters around, and that could be easily decoded by a person. But modern encryption on computers is very math heavy. It's complicated math. I'm going to show you an example here. It's not a great example, but I'm just trying to help you visualize it with some very, very simple math, which is basically going to end up being like a shuffling Caesar cipher. But if I come in here, let's say I had a math problem that looked like this. Some variable plus some variable equals some variable, right? And we'll call this A, B, and C. So let's say I have a number I want to hide, and I want to give it to you, and so you can unencrypt it to get the original number. So I could say like 8 plus 1 equals 9. So I can give you this 9, but you can't figure out my original message, which is 8, right? So I need you to know the number 8, but I send you 9. This would be our key. So this would be our original message, this would be our key, and then this would be our encrypted message. So I send that to you. You have the 9. Unless you know this number 1 is the key, there is no way for you to undo that to get to 8, because there's an infinite number of possibilities, right? You can't, if you have C and one of these other two, you can figure out the other, but if you just have C, if you just have one of these numbers, you can't figure out the other two, right? And again, this is very simple math. Real encryption's a lot heavier than this. So, for example, going with this with the 9, if I gave you 9, how can you figure out the 8? Well, again, there's an infinite number of possibilities that these two numbers could be. So, I mean, it could be 7 plus 2 equals 9, right? It could also be, if I said 10 plus negative 1, because adding a negative number is the same as subtracting. So there's an infinite number of possibilities. So there's no way for you to know for sure what number this is without the key and the encrypted message. That being said, we're talking about just numbers here. And of course, if we come here, when it comes to computers, we have different types of encoding. Here we have an ASCII chart, which is showing values, and each letter in the alphabet and other characters have values in this, right? And we'll look at the decimal value here. So here you can see that a capital A is 65, a capital B is 66, lowercase a is 97, lowercase b is 98. So I could take these numbers and put them into a simple math equation like the one I just showed you and say, oh, there's an infinite number of possibilities, except for that's not really true, because going back to if we're actually writing words, there are ways for you to decode these things, and the more you do it, like I said, I used to do the ones in the newspaper all the time, there's little tricks that you learn. So if I come here and we can look, I just Googled, searched most common two letters in words, right? Because that's one of those big things. So you come here, you go order of frequency, the most common doubles. So S, S, E, E, T, T, F, F, L, L, M, M, O, O are the most common in the English language for two letters to be the same next to each other. Okay? Also a big thing when you're trying to decode something like this by hand is there's only two words that are one letter long in the English language, A and I. So if I come here, this is an online Caesar cipher website, and I put in this sentence and I said decode this. Let me go here and just say ignore case, right? I could look at this, and the first thing I would do is go, okay, are there any one letter words? Okay, we have P here and H here. I know that P and H, one of them's going to be I and the other one's going to be A. If we kept maintain case right away, I can go, okay, if things were written properly, P is obviously I, right? Like I is in me, because it's capital there. But let's say it's not, we're ignoring case here. Okay, so I'm like, okay, P is either A or I, and H is either A or I. Then I'd start looking at other things. You could look for common two-letter things. So we got the TTs there. Doesn't help too much with this sentence. But another thing I look for is TH and usually letter E, or TH and something, because those letters are common to go together. So I would start looking for me at three-letter words, because the is in a lot of sentences. So here we have a three-letter word, that could be the. Here I have a three-letter word, that could be the. That's all in this sentence. So I would look at this and I go, okay, this is either TH or this is TH. This is probably not, because H would probably not be H. But if that wasn't the case, I'd be looking at that and I go, oh wait, we have AO here. Lots of words begin with TH. So we have TH there, TH there. If that's true, we have TH there. And I would go, okay, so this is TH. If this was E, I would now know what E is. Getting vowels is very important to this. But you would start stepping through it like that. And it's like, okay, if that's TH, oh, the letter before this is P. Well, I know P is either going to be I or A. So then I'd start thinking of four-letter words that end in ITH or ATH. And you start going through that, and this is something you could do. Again, modern day encryption is a lot more complicated than that. But going back to my math example, if I was to start applying this stuff to my basic math problem here, since we're not talking about numbers anymore, we're actually using numbers to represent letters, you would start seeing patterns like that. But modern day encryption is so much more complicated, using prime numbers and subprime numbers and their factorials and blah, blah, blah. If you start looking up things about, just YouTube search XORG, right? XORG and its uses. And one of the things is public and private shared keys, which allow you to do one-way math problems. So basically you have something you want to encrypt, and you run it through this math equation, and you get something output. Now you have a key that you use to encrypt it, but that key does not work the other way around. But you can have a separate key that does go back and forth. So you can give someone one key and you have one key, and so you can give one person and everybody these messages. And the thing is, you can decode the messages they encrypt with it, but not the other way around. So that way you can help verify that you know who you're getting it from. That being said, one of the things that kind of got me on this whole series of hidden messages and encrypted messages was the Meshtastic, which is something I had been interested in a while. Meshtastic are these little devices. I have one right here. This is a rack device, and I have two others that are ESP based, ESP32 or 826s. I think they're 32s. Yeah, because they have Bluetooth in them. And I've been playing with that a little bit. One of the reasons that I didn't get into it too much because I kind of live out in the middle of nowhere, and I'm like, I'm not going to be able to communicate with anybody. But a friend of mine actually started getting into it with some buddies of his, and he actually set up a big tower at his house, an antenna, and he's just a few blocks over, so I'm hoping to be able to ping off his tower and get further signals out. But he says to me, he goes, oh, it used to be private, but now the government has all the keys for the messages so they can decode it. And I was like, really? I'm like, oh, I guess, usually when you're sending messages over radio waves, there are a lot of restrictions and you're not allowed to encrypt stuff, so I wasn't too surprised there. But when I started playing with it and I go into the settings, when you create a channel, you have the option to encrypt it and you generate your own key. And I'm like, well, if I'm generating my own key, then no one should be able to decode this, right? Because again, going back to my math example, just because someone knows the equation, if they don't have the key, they can't decode it. And that's a big thing. It's like, we have a lot of open source tools that are for encryption. Well, it's like, if it's open source, can't people just decode the encrypted messages? Well, no, if you don't have the key, that's the point. And of course, there's points where maybe our computers get faster and the math isn't strong enough. Right now, the math is pretty strong. But we do come out with bigger numbers for these keys and the encryption process to make it harder because although you can't usually, unless there's a flaw in the math, there's no shortcut. But you can try brute forcing things, right? And so if you have a simple key that you used, like just a regular word, people could use either dictionary attacks where they use a list of words or brute forcing. But if you're using a really long randomly generated key, people aren't going to be able to really brute force it in many cases. But there's different things. So going back to the Meshtastic, I can encrypt it. And also I looked online, I didn't find anything saying that the government has the keys. And again, anytime that you're talking about encrypting a message, if you didn't generate a key yourself, then you're trusting a third party. So if you're using some of these apps that promise end-to-end encryption, unless you're generating a key, for example, if you're using a matrix server, you're generating your own key and then using that to encrypt your messages, then you don't have to worry about the server, decoding your messages. But if they're generating the key, oh yeah, it's encrypted from end to end, but we have the key, so we can get into anything. Think about that. But going back to something like the Meshtastic, right? Even if you are encrypted using the encrypted, you're sending individual messages. So something like setting up an SSH tunnel or a VPN or your Wi-Fi network, you're using a key, you're encrypting, but you're encrypting like a full signal or something. And there are ways to steal handshakes and that sort of stuff. I'm not going to get into that too much. But with something like the Meshtastic, right, I'm sending individual messages to everybody on the network, and it's being passed along, but it's encrypted, right? So anybody could collect these messages. A company, a malicious person, or the government, if you're worried about that, right? But they could stockpile these messages. Now, they can try brute forcing them, and maybe they'll get lucky if they have super powerful computers and your passphrase, your key wasn't that strong. Brute forcing would be kind of difficult, but it could, if it was worth their time and the money to put into hardware to decrypt it, so, theoretically they could. But with most computer problems, the problem isn't with the hardware or software. The problem is, they say, between the keyboard and the seat, right? It's me, the user, that's probably going to cause the security flaw, right? So let's say I'm sending messages and I don't want person X to get these messages, right? So person X could collect all the encrypted messages, and it's not just a full stream of encrypted data. It's each message, this is the encryption, this is the message that's encrypted over and over and over again. And someone could stockpile, anybody on the network could collect that stuff, right? Because it's going to everybody. Now, they may not be able to decrypt it now. They could try brute forcing it, but lots of times it's just easier if they collect them all. At some point, if they ever get the password, they can go back and decrypt all the messages, right? So, for example, if you're really concerned about security, my buddy gave me, a connection to his channel. And one of the ways of doing this is with the Meshtastic software, you create a QR code or a URL, which the QR code is the URL, and you give that to the person. Well, he texts it to me. Well, texting is not, SMS messages are not the most secure. I guess it would have been an MMS message because it was an image. But you're saying this, and if that's the weakness right there. One, it's stored on my phone in my text messages. It's stored in his phone as text message. They don't delete it. But it's also being sent through his cell phone provider, my cell phone provider, and, theoretically, someone could get access to that. like the government, if they're really concerned about what we're talking about, which I'm not doing anything the government's concerned about, I'm quite sure, and just pointing that out. But if you're really concerned about that, if they have access to that, or if at some point they get access to your phone, or if you're using one of these services, like if you're using an iPhone and you're texting another iPhone user, you're really chatting and it's going through Apple's servers. And same with Android. Now, I don't use Google Messenger. I use a Quix, Quix is my SMS messenger. But if most people are going to use the default messaging application on their phone, for many people it's going to be the Google Messenger. If you're using Samsung, they might have their own, but that's going through their servers like a chat if you're communicating with someone else using that. So now it's on their servers. At any point, if someone gets a hold of that URL with the key in it, they can go back, if they've been collecting all your messages, and decode them all. So that's the flaw. And when it comes to security like this, there's 101 different ways, things that you have to look at, right? So even if the encryption is strong and your key is strong, how are you getting that key to somebody else? And that's always the issue when it comes to communications, right? So if we're doing, and that's the benefit of going back to the public and private shared keys, right? I don't share my private key with anybody, so it's only on my device, right? And so someone would have to get on my device to get it. But the public one, people will be able to encrypt, but they won't be able to decrypt their own messages. Only I can, and the other way around. So that solves the problem of sharing keys. But as far as I know, the Meshtastic, I don't know the back end of it. But again, at any point, if someone gets a hold of my phone or his phone or our computer or even the device, right? So if someone comes in and grabs my device, you can plug it into USB and you get serial communication that, and you can get the information off of that. So that's the drawback of that. Even if it's a secure, strong encryption and you're using a strong, long passphrase to encrypt it all, at any point, if someone gets one of our devices that has the key on it, game over. Every message that we ever sent that they could have collected can now be decoded. So that's something to think about. It's not necessarily the encryption itself, but how are we sharing the keys? How are we storing the keys? Are you sending me the key in an email, a text? It's like, or you're just holding up the QR code so I can scan it. That would be a little bit better because you're not sending it through anything. It's being recorded device to device without a middleman. But again, if someone got a hold of his device, or if we're in a group chat and we do that, but then someone else sends someone else the key so they can join the chat through a text, now all our messages can be exposed. So there's a lot to think about when it comes to encryption. So yeah, the Meshtastic is a great little device, and regardless of whether you think that the government has the keys or not, which again, you generate your own keys, your messages could be logged by everybody, and at any point, if there's a security flaw, all those previous messages can be decoded. So I just wanted to point that out, that encryption these days are not just Caesar ciphers that are shuffling things around. It's a lot more complicated than that. And the issue isn't brute forcing it in many cases or a flaw in the math, which someone might find a flaw in the math in the future. But the biggest issue is, how are you sharing these keys? How are the messages being shared? Can they all be logged and decoded later if at some point our key gets decoded, or if at some point there is a flaw found in the math? Or maybe maybe I'm hiding messages now, and 20 years from now computers do get strong enough to where it's easy for someone to brute force these keys. If someone logged on my messages, or my messages from 20 years ago, important to keep private sometimes. You never know. Anyway, that's it for today. I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. And as always, I hope that you have a great day.